Sure. Sure.
So really, I hope you hear people really high.
Well, I think we're all going to do. Yeah,
Sometimes mixed
isn't it great?
off.
Yeah, Kate and I spent some good time at GA a couple years ago. Yeah.
Okay, we're going to start.
You ready to go?
Yeah.
All right. Well, welcome everyone. We are so pleased to have such a good turnout. Thank you to everyone for being here today. My name is Reverend Dave Egan. I'm the minister here at First Parish. Just a word to the wise, it is a hot day, so please stay hydrated. In all the coolers around here, there is complimentary water, so please don't be shy. We don't need anyone collapsing because you're too thirsty. First of all, I just want to thank you all, first of all, for being here. You know, I'm really humbled by your commitment to come out on a day like today and show your support for this work. There's also many others I want to thank for helping to make this event happen. First of all, our First Parish Anti-Racism Task Force was instrumental in putting this together. So I'd especially like to thank Thea Iberall, Becca Cornett, Nicole Hall, Kay Bennett, and Jeanette Rule. They largely were the ones who helped organize this event. I also want to give a big shout out to Chief Garrett, who's here, the head of the Medfield Police. She's here to show her support for this vigil, and we really appreciate her taking the time to be here. And she specifically said, if you have any questions about policing, police reform, and you'd like to speak with her, she is here and available for any of your questions you may have. Also, we are so pleased that we have such a wide variety of speakers today. We have local clergy here who will be speaking. We have elected officials, storytellers, students, community leaders, all here to share their experiences and their reflections of all that's happened over this past year. So we thank you all. You know, today we are here to mark the 1-year anniversary of when George Floyd was killed. A day that changed the world forever. You know, if only George Floyd's death were an isolated occurrence, we might not need to gather today for another vigil. But sadly, he's one but in a long line of people who have been killed due to the effects of racism. Sadly, this past year, we have seen far too many taken from us at too young of an age. So today we gather in honor of all of those who have been killed, who continue to suffer the effects of structural racism, and for all those who seek a world with more justice and more equity. So thank you all for being here today in support of this. So first to the stage, I would like to invite Representative Denise Garlick, who represents Medfield in the Massachusetts House of Representatives.
Good afternoon to everyone here. I am looking out and I see staff from the town. I see elected leaders from the town. I see young people from the town. I see community opinion leaders from our town. I would say to each and every one of you being here today is the sign that you are a community leader and how much our community needs you. I am invited here by virtue of my position as the state representative of Precincts 1 and 2 in Medfield. It is by virtue of that position that I get to engage in the events that are so important to the community. And each and every time I do, I learn and I hopefully grow about my knowledge of Medfield, about the people in Medfield, and about what's important to us. I wanted to say to you that the thought that I wanted to share is about what I believe is my personal work related to anti-racism and what I'm sure brings each and every one of you here for. Maya Angelou said, "Do the best you can until you know better. Then, when you know better, do better." And I think that's the journey we're all engaged in. Our community, our Commonwealth, and our country has a great deal of work to do to know better and to do better. I am proud to be able to do that work with each and every one of you. Thank you.
Thank you. And next up, I would invite Senator Paul Feeney to speak.
Thank you so much. Good afternoon, everybody. Wow, what a glorious day it is, huh? After a very, very challenging and difficult year, to see everybody here gathered together, starting to take off these masks where you feel comfortable, and to gather together in community, to recognize not only the challenging year that we've all had as individuals, but really to focus on the year that we have had as a nation, as a community, as a people, and to come together and mark those challenges, but by giving each other a little bit of hope. By giving each other hope, by gathering here on a Sunday afternoon in this wonderful community of Medfield that I am blessed to represent in the Massachusetts State Senate, and to come together as a people, to lift each other up, to let people know that here in Medfield, we think we can do things a different way, that we recognize the challenges that our Black, Brown, Latinx, Asian, and other people of color, brothers and sisters of ours, face every single day, not just in the headlines that make the news, but in their daily lives. Last year, in my position as a state senator, we started to witness the reckoning, the racial reckoning that's been a long time coming. And we had to do our own moral inventory and realize that racism, as deeply seated as it is, just like this coronavirus that we were facing, but very different because it doesn't come all the time just from the outside in, but that many times racism, being the virus that it is, attaches itself even to our own weakest selves and the weakest people among us. So as we do our own moral inventory, as difficult and challenging as that is sometimes, we had to be self-aware and realize that it's not enough to just say, well, I don't engage in that, but that we have to take the next step to say, when I see it, I'm going to call it out. And if I can change it, I'm going to change it. And I listened to the stories of my constituents in the Bristol and Norfolk State Senate District, and that's exactly what I did. I listened. Because I understood that it's not just about my frame of reference as a legislator. It's not just about where I come from, who I am, but it's about the stories of our neighbors, of our brothers and sisters in our communities that mean so much. And I listened. And that spurred me and many of my colleagues to action last year in the legislature. But that's not a magic wand. It's not a silver bullet. Every one of us has to bloom where we are planted. You don't have to be a legislator to take action. You don't have to be in the state Senate or the Mass House of Representatives to make a difference. You and your environment, whether you're a student at school, whether you're involved in a faith organization, whether you're involved in a community group, or even just around the water bubbler at work, you have the opportunity and the obligation to change the face of things. That's what we can do when we come together. Now, earlier I talked about racism being like the virus that we've faced for the last year. But unlike that virus, where we're all going out and getting inoculated and getting vaccinations, we need to seek the antidote for racism. But that doesn't come from Pfizer or Moderna. That vaccination, that antidote, comes from our Creator. And just as Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King said, that hate cannot drive out hate. Only love can do that. The antidote to racism and to hate in all its acts is love. 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 Unconditional love. Unconditional love. And if we're able to spread more of that as a community here in Medfield and throughout the Commonwealth and throughout the country, my God, what a difference we can make for generations to come. And if I could leave you with this and borrow from my own faith for just a moment, one of my favorite quotes, and I think many here have probably heard me talk about it before, comes from St. Francis. And St. Francis always told the faithful to preach the gospel, but only when necessary to use words. Think about that for a second. Preach, but only when necessary use words. Because St. Francis understood that faith, and I would say just like love, is more often caught than taught. That it's our actions that speak a heck of a lot louder than our words. By you being here today, you're taking an action. By you keeping us accountable, myself and the representative and your local leaders, your state leaders and your federal leaders, that's taking an action to keep us accountable. So I would say that it's incumbent upon all of us to use the words that you hear today to go forth and defeat racism, to defeat hate, to call it out in all its forms, and only when necessary, brothers and sisters, to use words. Thank you so much. Keep the faith. It's wonderful to be here. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Senator Feeney. Thank you, Representative Garlick. We really appreciate your powerful words and you representing us here in Medfield. We thank you for that. Well, next up, I would invite Nicole Hall, who is a founding member of Medfield Together, as well as a member of our First Parish Anti-Racism Task Force.
Thanks, Rev Dave. I'm going to read a poem about racial oppression written by a white poet. Black keys from trees, white keys locked on black shoulders, locked together above skeleton ribs, keys to 45 keyboards from one tusk. The word ivory rang out through the air. One tusk and one slave to carry it. Bought together if slaves survived the long march. Sold for spice or sugar plantations. If not, replaced by other slaves. 5 Africans died for each tusk. 2 million for 400,000 American pianos, including the one my grandmother played. Not to mention grieving villages burned, women, children left to die. The dead elephants whose tusks went to Connecticut, where they were cut, bleached, and polished, while my grandmother played in Illinois. My mother played, and I. There were many old pianos, and slaves were used till the 20th century. An African slave could have carried a tusk that was cut into white keys I played, starting with middle C and going up and down. This poem by Martha Collins speaks to how I, as a white person, can meander through the world in an oblivious way. I can play a piano built on the back of the oppressed, joyfully tinkering away, thinking only about my next song. Seeing the effects of racism for me is a choice, and there's tremendous power inherent in the idea of having a choice to see racism. As a white woman, I can choose whether to acknowledge someone else's pain, or I can choose to judge, to dismiss, to minimize, to criticize, to substitute my own assumptions about someone else's pain for their truth. By contrast, there's no rational choice involved for people of color. The pain and trauma lives deep in the body. It's real, it's visceral, it's generational, it's part of daily life. When I moved to Medfield, I was married with 1 kid and another one on the way. I lived in a big house in a fancy neighborhood. I played my piano, never once considering how the piano got built. Since my divorce, I've downsized and I've met friends who have inspired me to unpack my whiteness and see how it's shaped my life. I embarked on a journey where I read and listened to perspectives that I'd never considered before. I chose to understand the story behind the piano. The aperture of my heart and mind slowly began to open. I started understanding that my lived experience was a function of many things, but especially my race. I gradually suspended my judgments and instead substituted trust. I let go of my grossly flawed assumption that my white experience was some kind of benchmark for understanding the world. I recognized that I was no expert when it came to racism. I'll never have to experience it. And to debate someone else's lived experience is a fool's errand. Last year, with a few friends, I helped to form a group called Medfield Together, whose mission is to make Medfield a more inclusive community that values experiences of all its residents and shows folks considering a move to Medfield that they will be welcome no matter their background. I hope that with conscious awareness, our community can come together to understand that racism and its effects are still alive here in Medfield. In outdated school curriculum, in microaggressions students and community members of color have to endure, and in the largely white demographic here in town. I share this today to invite white folks to explore some unknown territory, the backstory of the piano keys from the poem. As you explore, I encourage you to find a white friend that you trust, to push past the discomfort and the resistance. If you make that choice, you will hear new music playing from your piano keys, and it will be richer, more harmonious, and full of complex beats and rhythms. Thank you.
Thank you, Nicole, for that very powerful reflection. Well, next up, I would invite Reggie Gibson to the microphone, a world-renowned storyteller.
Sisters and brothers, in-betweens and others. Heterosexual, transsexual, homosexual, if you just don't know a sexual, welcome. This is a great day to be here, but it's a shame to be here for this day. As I was preparing for an engagement at a church I was at earlier, as this Sunday approached, being the Sunday when George Floyd died, my poet's mind began to make connections, search for patterns. I couldn't help but think of the story of another man who was brutalized and subdued by policing authority, had his hands immobilized, died by the behest of state-sanctioned violence in front of a screaming crowd as he called out to a parent before he breathed his last. One whose death became a catalyst for a movement that spread beyond the parochial locale of which his death occurred. As a poet, it is one of my sincerest hopes that something I have to say will catch this world on fire. That maybe my last words will do something to baptize us out of this hate. George Floyd's last words did that. I can't breathe entered history. And before that, it entered history through Eric Garner. And we cannot unhear it, nor can we hear it the same way as we've heard it before. Those words, I can't breathe. Now, though my mind is on Floyd and the others, I want you to understand something. You are also speaking to the son of a cop. My father was an officer in Chicago for a long time of my growing up. And so I have a love-hate relationship with that uniform, right? I know many good cops. Some may not have been so bad. I wouldn't have known that at the time, but I'm sure my father probably knew who were not so good. And that perhaps he did something about it, perhaps he did not. All I know is that he left the force when I was about 16 years of age to pursue another job. And when I think that my mind is on George Floyd and his family and those who are left in the wake of that, those close to the epicenter of that, and we are in the ripples, I get to this point of thinking about Chauvin. And I ask myself, what has to happen to an individual to deny yourself the empathy to be okay with doing that? But we know this happens, right? We have people who can attack our Capitol with back the blue flags and kill police officers. Now, there is a disconnect of empathy that happens here. And I ask myself, is it because we in this country don't know each other? We don't have friendships with one another. We need to reach out more so to one another. For white people who choose to do that, you've got to understand something. Black people are going to be gun shy. The truth is, we don't trust you. We don't. There's a lot of history that goes behind that. So when you do decide to reach out in friendship, understand we're going to back off. Why you trying to be friendly to me? What's the deal here? Keep coming back. We respect consistency. We respect you getting burned and coming back to get burned again. The moment you say, well, I tried and they just didn't want to accept me, and you walk away, we're like, just what I thought. All mouth. No action. Or not enough action. So friendship, true friendship. My Irish brother who was up here earlier was speaking about his culture. True friendship, the word anamkara, soul friend, entered my lexicon after reading an Irish priest named John O'Donoghue and crawling into his words and understanding what he had to say to me, how he was reaching me as a young man who was well away from that culture. Anamkara, soul friend. That means you listen deeply, even when it hurts you. Right now, I'm thinking of the words of Maya Angelou, who said, she said, history, despite its wrenching pain, cannot be unlived. But if faced with courage, need not be lived again. Need not be lived again. I look at that as asking us, what kind of history do we want to move forward with? And what is it going to take for us to baptize ourselves away from the history that we've received? It's going to take testicular and ovarian fortitude to do that. That means when grandma, grandpa, and your aunt are saying what they say at the Christmas table, you don't just keep stuffing turkey in your mouth. Why? Because they old, and I want to spend these last few years with them. No, trust. That's not the way you do it. Oh, well, that's my best friend since college, and I just want to sit here and have Thanksgiving dinner with them. No, that's not how you do it. How we do this is the slow work. The only thing I have ever seen make better human beings is the challenge of better human beings. An invitation to friendship. This was written for something called the Race Amity Conference, which is happening right now in Boston. Come, let us listen. And when we speak, let us not speak in the worst ways in which we've been conditioned, in speech too often given to the pitch of sharpening knives. Let us use words that conjure each other alive, rather than these hexes etching outlines around our shared humanity. Let us sing. And let that song not be a song of some scream and screech of rats caged, poked by sticks and stoked into historic rage. Let that not be the image of this age. Rather, let it be of us entering the tent together. One in which we sit together and choose to refuse to wage war. One in which we create a moral counterweight to the perpetual hate we've been convinced to believe is our unavoidable fate. Can we prove the better in us is achievable? Yes. It might seem unbelievable, but it has happened before. In 1850, in Covert, Michigan, white pioneers ignored the mandated tradition of segregation in order to forge a community based on racial integration and equality. Yes, they did that. They said, screw you, governor, we're not putting that in place. Our morality is in a different space than yours, and we will act on that morality. We have a history of doing that, which I'm understanding is happening here. And then there were the genuine friendships and deep respect developed between Harriet Tubman and Thomas Garrett, Mary McLeod Bethune and Eleanor Roosevelt, Frederick Douglass and Daniel O'Connell, Martin Luther King and Rabbi Heschel, Fred Ross and Cesar Chavez, these pairs dared to work together and move this country ahead toward the deeper meaning of its creed. E pluribus unum, out of many, one. But that will only be possible if we come together. If we labor and plant the seed for a future not born of blood and animosity, one in which fists never happen, where open hands create peace and shared spaces, fostering amity between the races of our shared land. Oh, is it possible that we can call each other friend? Amigo, Rafiki, Penju, Sadiki, Chingu, Tomodachi, Mitla, Shavar, Kara, Barat, Dost, Arkadash, Prijatel, Kaibigan, Zunmi, Teman. Let us take a chance on knowing one another. Be vulnerable enough to open up and start showing one another our true selves, beyond what our scars have made of us. Let us be brave enough to ponder what anger and animus each of us must give up for a chance at a friendship based on human respect, dignity, and yes, love. Let us be honest enough to discuss what misconceptions each of us must let go of, what privileges each of us must refuse to cling to, what residue needs to be cleansed from our race-stained minds so we can see ourselves as one kind, become one heart, one mind. Let's start by opening one door at a time and letting the light in, and begin to find the courage to step forward toward each other and accept one another as kith, as kin, as friends. Thank you all for being here today, for choosing to move through the body of this world as a healing agent rather than a disease.
Thank you, Reggie. Well, next up, we were going to have Reverend Arturo from the UCC Church speak. Unfortunately, he was called away with a pastoral emergency, and he sends his regrets that he can't be here today. So next up, I would like to invite Father Steve Zukas from the Catholic Church here in Medfield.
Very presumptuous clapping. We're here to commemorate the one-year anniversary of the homicide of George Floyd and to decry racism. Racism and the acts which result are abhorrent because they violate justice. They reveal a failure to acknowledge the human dignity of the persons offended, to recognize them as neighbors, all because of race or ethnicity. Realities we witness as a society indicate a need for further education to facilitate conversation of hearts. The evil of racism festers in part because as a nation, there has been very limited formal acknowledgement of the harm done to so many. No moment of atonement, no national process of reconciliation, and all too often a neglect of our history. Many of our institutions still harbor, and too many of our laws still sanction practices that deny justice and equal access as a result. It is love that compels each of us to resist racism courageously. It requires us to reach out generously to the victims of this evil, to assist the enlightening of those who still harbor racism, and to begin to change policies and structures that allow racism to persist. Overcoming racism may be a demand of justice, but love transcends justice. The end of racism will mean that our community will bear fruit beyond simply the fair treatment of all. Only from a place of humility can we look honestly at past failures, ask for forgiveness, and move toward healing and reconciliation, whether it be as an individual, society, or nation. This requires acknowledgement of racist deeds and thoughts, and to ask for forgiveness. As we do, we recall the memories of George Floyd, Ahmaud Arbery, Breonna Taylor, and far too many others, as well as the numerous acts of violence against Asian Americans and Pacific Islanders, and decry the racism, violence, and the resulting deaths that have occurred. To work at ending racism, we need to encounter others, to see maybe for the first time those who are on the peripheries of our own limited view. We must invite into dialogue those we would not seek out otherwise. We must work to form relationships with those we might regularly try to avoid. This demands that we go beyond ourselves, opening our minds and hearts to value and respect the experiences of those who have been harmed by the evil of racism. Love also requires us to invite a change of heart in those who may be dismissive of others' experiences, or whose hearts may be hardened by prejudice or racism. Love should then move us to take what we learn from our encounters and examine where we as individuals, as a society, as a nation, continue to fail our brothers and sisters, or where it perpetuates inequality, and to seek to address these problems, such as advocating for equality in how laws are implemented, and advocating for moral budgets that reduce barriers to economic well-being, appropriate health care, education, and training. We can also learn from the example of other countries such as South Africa, Germany, and Rwanda that have recognized past wrongs and have come to understand the truth of their history. To overcome discrimination, a community must interiorize the values that inspire just laws and live out in day-to-day life the conviction of the equal dignity of all. While the roots of racism have extended deeply into the soil of our society, racism can indeed end if we contend with the policies and institutional barriers that perpetuate and preserve the inequality, and economic and social, that we still see around us. So let us indeed be one people, sisters and brothers to each other. Let us seek forgiveness for the times when we have failed to love and respect one another. Let us ask our Creator for what we truly need to overcome the evil of racism and to build a just society, thereby no longer allowing prejudice and animosity to infect minds or hearts, but rather be replaced with a love that respects the dignity of each and every person, regardless of origin. Amen.
Thank you, Father Steve. Well, next up, I would invite Thea Iberall to the microphone, a fantastic storyteller and a member of our First Parish Anti-Racism Task Force.
Thank you. I'll never forget it. It was November 4th, 2008, and I was sitting in the supersized wash and fold laundromat in Long Beach, California. Not because I don't have a dryer or washer, it's because I was the polling inspector at the election. And usually my staff and I have about 100 voters during the day, but this election we had 100 voters an hour. They were down the block, out the door, and I had to walk up and down the line and explain to the new first-time voters, how to use the machines. Our booths were set up in the big back room where the big dryers were. And out in the front, in the front room, there was a television. And because I was the boss, I could sneak out and see how the election was going. And Obama's numbers were going up. I mean, I was so excited. I mean, in my lifetime, to see the first African-American elected president of the United States, it was historic, and I was ecstatic. But at the same time on the ballot, there was Proposition 8, which was trying to amend the California Constitution so that I could not marry the woman I loved. The battle in California for same-sex marriage was fierce. And a friend of mine, a minister, made these t-shirts. And I was so proud to wear mine. Everyone matters. I loved wearing it. I wore it everywhere I went, and people loved it. Everybody loved it. Blacks, whites, straights, gays. They'd say, right on, yes. They would smile. They knew what it meant, and it meant what it said. So at that election, 2008, I'm staring at the television, and Obama is giving his acceptance speech. And flashing across the screen are the numbers for Proposition 8. And it passed by 52%. 7 million of my fellow Californians decided that I should not marry the woman I love. I had tears pouring down my face. I didn't know if I was happy or sad. It was utter joy and profound sadness racking my body. I thought my body would break. A lot has happened since that election. Proposition 8 was declared unconstitutional, and I married the woman I love. And Obama was president for 8 years. He was not assassinated or killed or lynched. Those are good things. What isn't good is that I had to put my t-shirt away. I would get too many ugly stares and negative comments, and I could no longer wear it. But maybe that's a good thing. You know, the systemic racism that we've been swimming in since the beginning of this country is finally out in the forefront. And there's daily proof for the biased treatment against blacks. You know, Long Beach is 42% Hispanic and 15% African American, and I was made the boss because of my privilege. The statement Black Lives Matter tells me to check my white privilege at the door. You know, my friend Sandra, she gets followed around when she walks around in stores. I don't. I've been stopped by traffic cops. I've lived through it. I mean, even I closed an airport once, and the FBI, the TSA, the ATF, the bomb squad, and the police, they were all really, really mad at me, and they were grilling me, and they were yelling at me. I lived through it. I was not jailed. I was not beaten. I was not arrested. I was not choked. So if you ask me if we have equal justice in this country, I say, as long as I can't wear my t-shirt, we are not there yet. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Thea. Well, next up, we have a high school student from Medfield High, Madeline Rothstein. Unfortunately, she can't be here, but someone is going to read her reflection for her. So I'd invite Julie to come forward and read that for her.
Hi. I'm sorry I'm going to be looking down most of the time, just reading through her words, and want to make sure that I'm adequately capturing her experience, because it's important that we hear the lived experience from the people who are here in town. So this is Madeline. Growing up in Medfield is no easy feat for someone like me. From the very start, my innocence was tainted, and I was forced to see the world from the perspective of a harsh reality that came crashing down on me, rather than through the magic childlike wonder most of my peers experienced. I think my experience was first polluted in preschool when I struggled with very bad anxiety. I endured panic attacks often, and the teachers at my preschool, instead of trying to help me through them, would shame me, yell at me, and discipline me. I was told I was acting up or scaring the other students. In a time when those who were meant to help me only made me feel more alienated. Then I started kindergarten, and my anxiety was much more under control, but there were a whole new set of obstacles I faced. Upon learning I was Jewish, a classmate told me I killed Jesus. Not knowing who Jesus was, I apologized and cried because I thought I had killed someone. Of course, it wasn't entirely the kid's fault. If this is what was being discussed at home, they may have only picked it up and repeated it to me. Fast forward to 5th grade. It was a very difficult year for me and my family. I was struggling with depression. My teacher at the time called me a sad sack because she didn't feel that my pain was real. By 6th grade, my history teacher was doing the same thing, telling my class that I was too negative and no one should be like me. I felt more and more alienated. One day, on the bus ride home, an 8th grader started telling me he was going to kill my family and that all Jews should be burned. I felt apprehensive and nauseous when I went home that day. I went to my guidance counselor the next day and told him about what was said to me and felt dismissed. The school called the parents to tell them what was said, but no other actions were taken. I rode that bus every day for 3 years and wasn't harassed as bad, but he glared at me every day and I felt extremely uncomfortable, but felt I couldn't say anything else. Throughout middle school, I was called firewood, a sick homage to the cremation of the Jews in the Holocaust. I felt I couldn't say something because would I be believed? In 8th grade, we went to the DC trip with my grade. Part of the trip included a visit to the Holocaust Museum. My grandfather is a Holocaust survivor, and at the time he was at the end of his life. This was a sensitive subject for me even more because of these circumstances. When we got to the museum, at the beginning of the exhibit, a museum worker told everyone to be respectful because of the sensitive nature of this subject. The beginning of the exhibit had a picture with a pile of dead bodies, the victims of the concentration camps. A group of boys behind me made some tasteless comments, and I saw people taking selfies in front of it. I felt nauseous. When we got to the pile of shoes, they were cracking jokes and making fun of me since I had started crying. When we got to the wall of names, people were finding each other's names and saying things like, "Oh, look, you were killed by the Jews, you were killed by the Nazis, you stupid Jew." The walls felt like they were closing on me. I couldn't take it anymore. My friend and I got out of there. We sat by the exit with one of the chaperones and waited to be able to leave. That experience has haunted me. When I got to school, I thought things might be different. I sat through an elective where my teacher made comments about her beliefs that she should have kept to herself. She told us that she felt people who wanted our town's racist mascot to change were just looking for something to be mad about. She told everyone that abortion is murder and should be illegal, and then told a story of a student that was pregnant and that people like that should not burden other students with their presence in class. My friend and I were shocked and horrified, but felt we could say nothing because the teacher, the authority figure, was the one spewing the hate. As a minority, going to school with a racist mascot made me feel unwelcome. The school did nothing for Holocaust Remembrance Day, for Black History Month, and Trans Visibility Day, as well as other important days like Lesbian Visibility Day, the Day of Silence, and Autism Awareness Month, to name a few. It felt like everything we did was about sports, and it only solidified the feeling I've felt my whole life. I don't belong here. I'm an outsider. Now, as a sophomore, I'm involved in several groups trying to create positive change in Medfield, but not without strong opposition. I refuse to let anyone else make me feel powerless or take my voice away. I'm here to tell you that it's important that you share your story and show people they aren't alone. Medfield has a long reputation of handling mental health poorly. I've seen it myself and with my peers. Another problem that I've seen is bigotry. The anti-Semitism, racism, homophobia, transphobia, sexism, and general intolerance and hatred. It starts with us, right here, right now, making a choice, a decision to be kinder, to be braver, to stand up for and protect one another. And the only way we can do that is by beginning to educate ourselves and make a real change and a real difference together. Thank you.
Well, Madeline, we're sorry you can't be with us here today in person to share that, but I just want to thank you for your bravery in sharing that really powerful personal reflection. Well, next up, I would like to welcome Reverend Mark Eames from the Church of the Advent.
As people of faith, we stand against the sin of racism. It is counter to all we believe about how every person is made in the likeness and image of God. I am convinced that we will never end racism while the corrupt system of segregation still holds. In 1954, which is before my parents were born, the Supreme Court in the landmark Brown versus the Board of Education case outlawed segregation. For more than 30 years after this case, schools slowly desegregated. We did not solve the problem, but progress was made. Unfortunately, America has resegregated itself since that time. A ProPublica study showed that the number of apartheid schools, that schools with less than 1% of the student body being white, have more than doubled since 1988 to nearly 7,000. The Government Accountability Office reported that poor, predominantly black schools have nearly doubled since the year 2000. I am not talking about racism during the Jim Crow era or the 1960s. This is happening now in the 21st century. Professor Rucker Johnson at the Berkeley Public Policy Center did an extensive study on the effects of desegregation beginning in the 1960s through the 1980s before the process of resegregation began. He followed the black students who went to desegregated schools over their lifetimes. What he discovered would have warmed the heart of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. Black students in desegregated schools were more likely to graduate, were 22% less likely to be incarcerated. These students earned 30% more income annually. There was even a difference in health. A black American who attended a desegregated school had the general health of a person 7 years younger than a black American attending an overwhelmingly black school, essentially a segregated school. Johnson also studied white students who attended these desegregated schools. He did not find one negative effect in any of the metrics for white students. Whites do not suffer from going to school with black Americans. Segregation is the enemy. It is racist and unjust. It makes everything worse for black Americans and does not help white Americans at all. Our society has grown more segregated over my lifetime. As reported by the Washington Post, now a full 75% of white Americans do not have a person of color in their social circle. Ending racism will require building relationships across difference. This is best done when we live together in fully integrated, diverse communities. The question then remains for all of us: what obstacles exist that prevent more people of color from living here in Medfield?
Thank you, Reverend Eames. Well, next up, I would invite Curt Jackson, a Medfield artist and storyteller, to the microphone. All right. Well, next up, I would invite Becca Cornett, a member of our anti-racism task force, to the microphone.
I am. I'd like to talk about white privilege. White privilege is a term that raises some people's hackles. I get it. I've heard plenty of people who identify as white who don't believe they have privilege for a variety of reasons. They grew up poor. They're up to their eyeballs in student debt. They worked hard to earn what they have today. They don't live in a fancy house, carry a designer handbag, or drive an expensive car. Privilege does not mean that we have everything we want or that everything was handed to us. What it does mean is that people who identify as white, we've simply not had to face the same roadblocks that stand in the way of people of color and other marginalized groups. I read an article by Peggy McIntosh suggesting that people who identify as white carry an invisible knapsack of privileges. It made me reflect and realize some of the privileges I carry. When I walk down the street in Boston at night, people smile politely and no one clutches her purse closer to her body. If I get pulled over by the police, I'm not worried about being physically harmed. I can walk straight into my new neighbor's yard to welcome them to the neighborhood without them for a moment thinking that I'm there for some nefarious purpose. No one has ever questioned my right to get into the college I went to or to have the jobs that I was offered. The generations in my family before me were not denied home ownership based on race. They were not denied the bank loans they needed. They were more likely to get a high-paying job than their BIPOC counterparts. Because of this, they were able to save wealth across the generations. This compounds exponentially over time. For example, white Boston residents have an average net worth of close to $250,000. For Black Bostonians, the average net worth is a mere $8. I did not forget any zeros. $8. I would ask the people in the crowd today who identify as white, what are your privileges? What advantages have you had in life, large and small, that our BIPOC friends and neighbors do not enjoy? And what are you going to do about it? Structural racism is not a problem for the BIPOC community to solve. It is a problem for people who identify as white to solve. Truly being aware of our white privilege is an important step along the way. Thank you.
Well, now I would invite you to join me in a spirit of prayer. O Spirit of life, the love of many names and no name at all, we ask that you be with us now, here, in this place. For today we remember all of those lives taken from us far too soon. We honor all who have been killed due to brutal racism and hatred. I will now say the names of the many victims from the past year due to racism. And after each name, I would invite you to repeat the phrase, say their names. So let us now pause and remember George Floyd, Dion Johnson, Robert DeLon Harris, Julian Edward Roosevelt Lewis, Pamela Turner, Kurt Andrus Reinhold, Mikkel Eric Lewis, Miriam Carey, Jonathan Price, Anthony Jones, Corin Gaines, Marcellus Stinnett, Andre Maurice Hill, Delana Ashley Yuan Gonzalez, Amir Johnson, Tatiana Jefferson, Rayshard Brooks, Paul Andre Michaels, Wilbon Cleveland Woodard, Xiaojua Tan, Shelley Frey, Yasin Mohammed, Da Yuang Fang, Casey Goodson Jr., Yvette Smith, Carl Dorsey III, Yang A. Wee, Yuen Jung Grant, Patrick Lynn Warren, Micaiah Bryant, Genoa Donald, Alicia Hernandez Ortiz, Sunchua Kim, Arnell States, Soon Chung Park, Donovan W. Lynch, Adam Toledo, Dante Wright. We say their names today to remember all that they lived for, all that they dreamed of, and yes, all that they died for. Let us hold their names in our hearts as we work together to dismantle racism within ourselves and within others, to build a world with justice and with equity. Let us hold their memories in the light of love and remember that the ongoing work of building that beloved community begins with us here, now. So in closing, I leave you with the words of Rabbi Tarfon, as written in the Talmud. Do not be daunted by the enormity of the world's grief. Do justly now. Love mercy now. Walk humbly now. You are not obligated to complete the work, but neither are you free to abandon it. So may it be. Amen. Do we have Curt Jackson back? Well, now I would invite to the microphone Curt Jackson, a local Medfield artist and storyteller.
I apologize for earlier. I had drank so much water. I had to go. First, thank you to everyone who came out to show your support for this ongoing issue in our country. My name is Curt Jackson, and I've been a resident here in town for 7 years and employed here at the after-school program for more than 25 years. I've taught art classes at the Medfield Zulo Gallery for more than 20 years, and I've been telling stories to anyone who's willing to listen for about the same amount of time. I'm married to my amazing wife, Megan. We're raising 2 beautiful girls, inside and out. My roots are beginning to run deep in this town, and so is my love for so many people who make up this town. The people here have always treated me well, and because of that, there isn't much I wouldn't do for the well-being of this town. My love for this town is why I'm standing up here today. My job today is to give anyone who is willing to listen some insight of what it's been like living as an African American since the day I was born, February 14th, 1964. Feel free to do the math. I find that through working with kids for so many years that the best way to educate is through storytelling. So today, I want to share with you some short but pertinent stories of the life of an African American through the eyes of Curt Jackson. I was born in Boston. I was put up for adoption and raised by two amazing and caring parents, Ernest and Henrietta Jackson, who were foster parents because they couldn't have children of their own, but they had lots of love to give. My father was born in Georgia, and my mother, Liberia, in West Africa. We lived in Roxbury until I was 6 years old, and then moved to Dorchester until I was in 3rd grade. There were a few violent events in the city that provoked my parents to move us out of the city where they thought things would be safer for us. So we moved to Taunton, which was a little diverse, but it was still culture shock for me. I went from one white girl in my class to being the only white person in my class. But in 8th grade, we moved to Norton, which was a neighboring town. And that was the first time I realized that you could be teased and ridiculed for being black. My parents expected us to follow some golden rules: treat people with respect and be kind. I found out pretty quickly that there were kids, parents, and teachers who did not follow those same rules. So Alex Haley's book, Roots, was about his African ancestors, became a TV series when I was in high school. It was supposed to make people aware of the atrocities that African slaves had survived through. In my home, these characters from the book became our heroes. They were people that we could relate to, but for the white kids in my school, the story was an excuse for them to see us as lesser people. They couldn't relate to the struggle, the strength, and the determination that was depicted throughout the story. The few blacks in my class were taunted and being called names of the characters from the stories. I decided I would pretend that it didn't bother me. Anything else wasn't in my character at the time. Although the black jokes, teasing, and insults daily, they remained acceptable. I still managed to establish many great friendships and became pretty popular amongst my peers. I believe it was because I stuck to those golden rules my parents taught me, but I still experienced the hate. Relationships with girls in my community of predominantly white people were challenging, heartbreaking, and in many situations unacceptable. I didn't attend my prom as a junior because the mother of the girl that I was dating at the time, she wouldn't allow it because I was black. Now her mom was a teacher in the middle school in my town. She was very good friends with a couple, Mr. and Mrs. Keyser. Now, Mr. and Mrs. Keyser both worked in the high school that I attended. Mrs. Keyser was the math teacher. I never had her as a math teacher. I never had a conversation with her. But I could tell by the look in her eyes that she despised me. Sometimes you can just feel the hate. Now, her husband was my guidance counselor. So you can only imagine the guidance I got in high school. Well, I managed to graduate, and I moved on to Dean Junior College and then Northeastern. As a young adult, I became aware that my experience with racism would continue. I was driving home one day from work. Now, I worked as a carpenter all through high school and through college. I had a couple of situations in Foxborough in particular where I showed up at the job early, and I wasn't there 5 minutes, and the cops came pulling up, wondering what I was doing in the neighborhood. I told them I was working a job. We're going to do this roof, my old principal from high school. And my boss and my good friend pulled up, and I could see them like concern a little bit in their eyes. For me, it was a little embarrassing. So everything was fine. I went to work. Next day, same thing. I showed up to work early. And this is why I never come to work early. I show up to work early. I'm there maybe 5 minutes. And again, the police show up. Somebody called. And same thing, different cop. And again, I'll never forget my friends driving up in the truck and just being in hysterics, just laughing because this happened now 2 days in a row. But for me, it was embarrassing. So anyways, I'm on Route 95. I'm driving home from my construction job, and this car goes flying by me, 90, 100 miles an hour. And I'm like, he's going fast. And next thing you know, I see a state cop, and he comes flying by in pursuit of this guy until he pulls up to me, black man in an old beat up truck, and he looks over at me and decides that that person speeding was no longer the person he wanted to stop. So he then slowed up his car, pulled up behind my truck, put on his lights, and pulled me over. Now, we both knew I wasn't the one he should be pulling over. There was this man driving 90, 100 miles an hour recklessly down the highway, and here I was getting pulled over because I was black. So he comes to my car, and the first thing he says is, "Don't worry, there's another cop up there. He's going to get that guy." Before I even look, tell me, what do you have on your record? I had nothing on my record. I was a pretty good person. So he kind of went home empty-handed. So that, for me, was very eye-opening. Whoa. So I want to share another story, if the weather allows it. I was living with my parents in an apartment in Easton while attending Dean Junior College. I was the only one home that morning, and I'm studying for an art history test. There was a faint knock on my door. I got up, I got myself dressed, And I went to the front door of the apartment and saw a police car, but no one was at the door. So I go back to my room to study. As I'm laying in bed, I hear the slider of my back door being opened. And before I knew it, there were 2 police officers standing in my room. They asked me if I was Aaron Jackson, and I told them no, that he was my brother and he hadn't lived with us for over a year. They asked me if I had any ID. I told them my license was in my car outside, but I had so many pictures of me and newspaper clippings from all the sports I had done in high school. And I said, well, you can look all over the wall. That's me, that's me, that's me. They didn't care to look. They pushed me onto my bed. They put the handcuffs on me. And they proceeded to bring me outside. That was embarrassing. And when I got outside, this white woman, my neighbor, came over to the police. And they said, no, that's not him. And then they took the cuffs off of me. So it took this woman who had no idea, or she had some idea who I was, but it took her word for them to take the handcuffs off of me. But it was very scary for me. I lacked a sense of control. And that my very existence was threatened that day. Now, I stuck around outside, and I had conversation with the officers because I wanted to let them know that the person whose rights they violated was actually a good person. But I can't help to think about that day, especially when you hear on the news all the people or the names that we listed today whose lives have been taken. And I thought about me in that moment where I was thrown onto the bed and the handcuffs put on me, because I thought for a moment, this isn't right. I should fight this. I should resist. And I think what happened, or what would have happened that day had I resisted? Maybe I wouldn't be here today. Maybe if I weren't here, I'm not able to impact the people in this town that has also impacted me. So the reason I'm here before you today, sharing these stories that happened to me growing up as a young man. If anyone did the math earlier, you realize I'm no longer a young adult. Since then, we've learned so many success stories about African Americans in this country. None I ever learned about in history class. I can't tell you how thrilled I was to see a black president in my lifetime. My stories don't compare. They don't compare to those things that have happened to so many black people in this country. I think this pandemic has forced some privileged people to become more thoughtful. Many privileged people have never been inconvenienced or oppressed for so long. You now understand what it's like to be limited to places where you can go, or people that you can talk with, or worry about what people think of you because of the mask that you're wearing or the mask that you're not wearing, or the safety of your kids. If you're here today because you want to help and you want to understand how people of color are feeling, I can't speak for everyone, but I can tell you that I thought things would have changed by now. We take these steps forward and then we take steps back, and we don't seem to be getting anywhere. Things need to change. Again, I put myself in the shoes of those people who don't want change. Change is hard. Change is scary. Change can challenge your very existence. Change can make you feel like you don't have any control. To those people, I can only say, welcome to the club. To be a person in this country, be a person of color, it's hard. It's scary. You don't feel like you have any control, and it can threaten your very existence. And that needs to change. Thank you.
Thank you, Curt, for that powerful testimonial. Well, next up, I would invite Rabbi Micah Citron to the microphone from Temple Beth David in Westwood.
Thank you so much, Reverend Egan. Thank you to First Parish. It's an honor to be included, in so many of our members at Temple Beth David in Westwood are residents of Medfield. And so my wife and I, Rabbi Karen Citron, where we serve the congregation, feel blessed to be here. As I was listening to everyone share perspective and teaching and poetry and story, this gathering is an act of healing in and of itself. It seems to me that racism and senseless hatred is an act of isolating, of driving apart, of saying that you don't matter. So to do the opposite gives hope. I would offer this teaching in prayer. In Genesis chapter 1, which Reverend Eames referenced, scripture which so many of us share in common, we learn that God creates Adam, the human being, in the divine image. Adam in Hebrew literally means earthling. We are the ones who are made of the stuff of this world. And God breathed the breath of soul and consciousness and conscience into each of us. In the ancient rabbinic imagination, God takes from the earth all of the colors of the dust to make this unique creation, Adam. White earth and black earth, red and green and orange and all colors in between. And God takes these different colors of dust from the four corners of the earth to show that each person can call earth his or her home. Each person reflects the beauty and unique diversity of creation. If we are created in God's image, and that image reflects the hue of every creation, and certainly when we look around at the colors of creation, how could God not have meant it to be diverse? Then it means that there can be no greater desecration of God in the world than racism. And more than distorting God's image, we taint our own souls with this moral stain. By gathering here today, we affirm and lift up God's image in each of our faces, and embrace the differences that make us beautiful. By being here today, we commit to being our brothers' keepers and our sisters' keepers, joining together to say Black Lives Matter, to speak out against Asian hate, to care for the immigrant and push xenophobia back to the shadows, to not allow anti-Semitism or Islamophobia to gain a foothold in our communities. We need not accept the status quo of systemic racism. While it has shaped our past and continues to persist in the present, it need not be our future, especially when we gather as people of faith and goodwill, as we do at this moment, to remember the promise of our nation, that we are endowed by our Creator with an essence that gives us all basic rights, that say that we all belong. We can build a just society where each and every person and all communities can live in dignity and thrive. There is enough for all of us to go around. Blessed are you, soul of the universe, who creates all manners of people in a multicolored, multifaceted tapestry that is a reflection of you. O God, help us to drive out hate and complacency and shape a nation rooted in justice, righteousness, and peace. Amen.
Thank you, Rabbi Micah. Well, next up, I would invite Jamel Adams to share with us a story, a powerful local storyteller. Welcome to the microphone.
Before I go there, volunteer. We got somebody. Show some love, show some love, show some love, show some love. Correct. So, first, I know I'm supposed to be there, I'm gonna mess it all up. It's all right. I believe this can happen. I believe we can be together. You gotta believe this in order for it to happen. Yes? Let me say I believe this can happen. Yo, it happens every day. But I gotta say something before we get into our thing. We didn't know what was going on with the weather. Everybody like, I don't know, I'm hanging there until I feel that first drop. The magic that happened, the purpose, the reason why we're here today is so that we can understand that we can do this together. Before you know, we had people holding this thing together so that it didn't blow away. So that y'all can stay here. The wind's going crazy and all of that. These things they're not going to keep sticking those up trying to keep them together. At one point, it was 2 women for 2 female presented people. My pronouns are he series. And then we had 2 males holding. Black guy, white presented guy, 2 white looking free men. Working together to keep this thing from blowing over while we here to be together. That's the reason why we're here. That's why we're here. It's happening right now. That's the whole purpose. That's the whole point. The folks be like, nah, we're gonna hold this down, we're gonna work that out. Now let me hear you say, love. Love. How you love. How you love. Who you love. Who you love. Again, love. Love. How you love. How you love. Who you love. Who you love. Now the reason I'm asking you to say this is because if we come at this being together with that mind state, we'll interact with each other differently. Because when somebody that you love, imagine someone that you love, think of them right now. You might be here with them right now. I didn't start my timer. Hold on. The person might be here with you right now. Right? So if that person starts to have shortness of breath, you're not going to say, I'm not a doctor unless you are a doctor. I can't help it. You're going to try to figure out how it can help this person get what they need. If this person that you love gets injured, you're going to try to figure out how can I help them get the help that they need. If they're balled up in a corner crying, this person that you love, you're not going to just walk past them and just let them cry. We're not going to do that because we love them. We want to make sure that they're all right. Now, we love each other, and we say that a lot. Let's behave that way. if we know there are people that are being preyed upon that feel unjustly in the mix and that they don't feel like they matter and that their welfare is at stake, we should do what's necessary to help them out. We should put ourselves on the line and make that happen. It happens all the time. When things are going, at first, the first time they went a little bizarre in Minneapolis, there was, you remember the Moms Brigade? Anyone remember the Moms Brigade? Anyone who does not, what happened was, when the riots were happening, and there's a reason for the riots, people often talk about the reasons for it, they just talk about the stuff. But that was happening, so what it was, the Moms Brigade were a group of white women who said, you know what, we know we got a little bit of power in the world, so what we're going to do is lock arms and stand between the protesters and those forces that are against us. Because they know the chances of us getting hurt are very similar to them because of how we are positioned on the planet, particularly in this country. And they did that. And it worked. Those were people putting themselves on the line. Now what happened was at some point, tear gas started going. What happened at that point was, there were some males, mostly white males, that decided we got to figure out how to help them. So they went and got some leaf blowers. They knew this at that time. Because use the leaf blowers to blow away the tear gas. To protect the people that's putting themselves on the line to help out. That's what that is. Trying to figure it out. So when we use that word love, let's mean it. Let's connect in that way. Love how you love who you love. Don't say you love me if you don't love me. And it's all right. You haven't done the best job of allowing people to know that there's going to be a difference of opinion. Because sometimes you go ahead and know with things like that. But if you say you love me, I'm going to expect that. If I say that I love you, you should expect that I engage you in that way. Yes? Now, sometimes you got to get through the ugly in order to get through the beauty. And there's a lot of ugly. There's a lot of ugly. So I'm going to share something that got some ugliness in it. We're going to wrestle with that a little bit and maybe get moving on it. We'll see what happens. Imagine going to church and getting shot. Imagine pulling out your wallet and getting shot. Imagine using your cell phone and getting shot. Calling out for help and getting shot. Imagine jogging and getting shot. Imagine falling asleep in your car, waking up and getting shot. Imagine having a broken taillight and getting shot. Imagine your child in the back seat when you get shot. Imagine being broadcast live on Facebook Live, bleeding out when you get shot. Imagine fitting a description and getting shot. Imagine being handcuffed on the ground of a train stop and getting shot. Imagine waiting for a friend in the coffee shop and call cops, put you out. Imagine being asked for trust you ain't got. Imagine college, graduating. A lot of colleges are graduating right here today. Remember 3 years ago this happened. Imagine college, graduating, celebrating, and getting shoved off the stage with that degree you just got. Imagine being choked out and selling cigarettes until your nose loses snot. I mean, your snot box rock like you've been shot for being alive on a day that's hot. Imagine praying every day not to get shot. Imagine every blue uniform you see gives you flashbacks of getting shot. Are you tired of this? Are you tired of this? Yes. Imagine being tired of getting shot at. Imagine they tell your family you've been shot because they forgot. Forgot to check the plot. Forgot to apologize for adding you onto the family plot. Forgot to locate a non-lethal spot to place the shot. Shots fired! Are you not entertained? Imagine being fired as a slave and they getting shot. Your love, getting shot, running for freedom, and getting shot. Becoming desensitized to getting shot. Not being afraid of getting shot. Expected to get shot. Being nonviolent, yet prepared to get shot. Taking a shot at life and getting shot. Taking a shot at shooting back and getting shot. And then your family members get shot. Do they have guns in heaven? Can you get shot in heaven? Can you imagine a place where you can go and not get shot? I cannot. Turn to your neighbor. Say, neighbor. Say, neighbor. I'm the love that hate can't stop. I'm the love that hate can't stop. Need that. Need that love that hate can't stop. See, in every piece of that poem, faction, there was not one piece of it that was rhetorical, that was made up. Those are just a series of painful deaths and circumstances that receive national attention. The accounts that don't receive that attention. Some a little more local, opposed to us, but they all come to impact us all. Lock in on love, y'all. Lock in on. See, I'm gonna stop. I promise. Lock in on love. Right over there in Hopkins, thinking of the things going on. Trying to figure out what happened with Michaela. The whole bunch of stuff going on. You know, all that kind of stuff. Something happened. So I mentioned those two names to make this point, or to bring the focus in. The most disrespected people on the planet. On the planet. The most disrespected people on the planet are women. Women are the most disrespected people on the planet. And of them are women of color. And of them are black women. So what are we communicating when these things are happening and that love is not being shown in the way that it's supposed to? The first thing we say is that what happened that way if that person was white? There'd be more energy. There'd be more love. There'd be more resources, right? We need to love how we love. Y'all feel me on that? This is about this holding up this thing. Holding up this thing is big. That's love. I don't know if they agree with me or not, but they agreed to work together for the greater good. That's what this is about. I don't know why my man is here with the Black Lives Matter shirt is on, because he agrees with me or not, but he's here. When he's listening to controversy, listen to be present. It's for the greater good. The community knows he's present. The officer here is present. We need that. Too often that conversation doesn't happen. We stay away from each other. We can do this. I believe this can happen. I do it on a regular basis, folks. I'm a chill. I won't stop. This is important. And I appreciate folks that stayed. Not know what additional storm was about to happen. And deciding to stay. I appreciate you all for doing it. The love of my heart is extended to you all for doing it. Alright, my man telling the story, I definitely want to talk to you. I mean, hit me. They weren't just stories. Too often on the news, there's a reporter that says, I'm going to show you something. And this story is a little difficult to watch. And for me, it's a little bit more than difficult to watch. When someone like me gets murdered, looking like me, looking like my kids. And that's all you're going to say. It's a little different. You know what I mean? So, let's talk to each other. I'm a chill. Thank you.
Well, thank you to all of our speakers today. Thanks to all of you for being here today. You know, all of you here today are what gives me hope. We clearly have work to do. This is but the beginning, but for you to show up today and to show your solidarity and your support, it's what gives me hope. So I hope you're able to take a piece of what you heard today, bring it forward into your lives, and make those changes so that we can truly build that beloved community where all are welcomed, where all are honored, where all are loved. Thank you, and go in peace.
Oh,